Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Author in Residence series with Arun Gupta on his new book, Venture Meets Mission. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a Director of Programs at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit that's building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. As we're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So check out those links and resources in the chat in a moment. I've got a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Firstly, get those digits moving and let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. Secondly, we're going to open up for a live Q&A near the end of the event, so please submit those questions for us and our speaker in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout our discussion. We'll try our best to get to them all. Now, none of what we do here at the center would be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, Microsoft Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact, BPM, and HubSpot for startups. We're humbled by their contributions and hope you're grateful too. Now I'm going to launch a couple of polls to take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of you are feeling about your businesses today. So the first poll I'm going to ask is right here. Let's go. So how are you feeling about your business right now? Are you feeling optimistic, in survival mode, a little anxious, or fearful? We use this information to provide additional wellness resources for our entrepreneurs, you out there in the community. So let us know. Thank you for participating. Got about half of you. All righty. Well, I'm going to end this poll. Share those results. Looks like majority are optimistic. Some are in survival mode. Some are feeling a little anxiety and a little fear. So hopefully our conversation today will help that alleviate some of those sentiments. So the second poll, what's keeping you up at night? This helps us understand the additional programs that we should be providing in the next couple of months. So is it finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or just survival? Let us know. Super helpful information for us at the center. Looks like we've got the Bay Area, California, New York, Winchester, New York, Houston, Texas, Twin Cities. All righty. Great. We got a good distribution of time zones. Looks like finance is at the top of the key. So I know our conversation with our special guest today will help with that one. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome in the chat to our special guest. Arun Gupta is the CEO of Noble Reach Foundation and author of our conversation today. And it's also Amazon's recent #1 bestseller in business and entrepreneurship, Venture Meets Mission. Arun, welcome.
Colin, thank you for having me.
So excited to dive into this conversation on your hot off the press book. So I'm just going to kick us off with Venture Meets Mission. Why is it vital for entrepreneurs and the government to join forces in solving the world's biggest problems?
Yeah, well, thank you, Colin. And it's fitting to be chatting with the Entrepreneurial Center here at NASDAQ. Look, I think we're in unprecedented times, as we all kind of feel, and a lot of that's dictated by the rapid change that we're all feeling. That rapid change is technological, it's geopolitical, it's social, and whenever you have rapid change taking place, a planning mindset isn't prepared for that. You need an entrepreneurial mindset, one that's about testing and learning, about running quick experiments, being okay to fail. And so if there's never a time where we need entrepreneurs in that mindset to solve these big problems, it's now. I think also, look, I think your poll kind of highlighted it. Entrepreneurs are instinctively optimistic. And to solve big problems, you have to be optimistic. And not only is it the method by which entrepreneurs go about this, but it's the zest and the optimism that they bring to problem solving that we sorely need. Now, the issue is that the problems that we're trying to solve are large and are global. And so one startup or, in the Valley or anywhere else isn't going to solve climate by themselves, isn't going to solve cybersecurity, isn't going to solve healthcare. isn't going to solve food insecurity, national security. We need the reach and scale of government. And so, I think the inspiration for the book really was based on the class I was teaching called Valley Meets Mission, but really talking about like how do we take the zest and the optimism and the innovation around the entrepreneurial ecosystem and really marry that around larger government ambitions, but doing that in a for-profit way. And so I think there's now more than ever the ability to mobilize capital around people, purpose, and profit like you couldn't before. And we write the book in a very optimistic tone, and I am very optimistic in that I think there's a generational opportunity in front of folks right now that are entrepreneurs, young professionals, even folks in government, to think about how do we collaborate to solve these big problems.
I love it. And why are these two sectors often at odds?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's less that they're at odds with each other, although it gets presented that way. But think of it as different cultures, and which are rooted in different incentive systems and reward systems. In government, you need to be right usually 100% of the time when you're dealing with providing infrastructure and safety and taking care of your constituents and things of that sort. So the idea of testing and failing is not ingrained in the culture there. On the entrepreneurial side, on the other hand, it's all about testing as many things as you can and then doubling down as quickly as you can on things that are working, but acknowledging that it's okay to fail. I joke around a little bit, at a cultural level, as a VC, that if I was measured the same way as government is, we'd never raise another fund. And I say that because, as a VC, you can make 10 bets and 8 of them can go sideways, and then 2 of them are huge wins, and your next fund is oversubscribed. You're a government agency and you can make 10 bets, and 9 of them can be fine, and 1 of them might be Solyndra, and you're carrying that around with you for an extended period of time. And so it creates a level of risk aversion, and that is a bit where we try to explore in the book about how do we then, given the acknowledgement of those 2 cultures, and cultures are hard to change. So it's not like as easy as saying like, hey, you need to change your culture, but how do you create a renewed partnership leveraging those 2 separate cultures to solve these big problems? A friend of mine that we reference in the book, Dan Tangerlini, had an interesting idea where he's like, part of the risk aversion in government is that every agency has what they call an IG, an inspector general. And their focus is to make sure that people are complying and doing things by the rules. And if you kind of go off kilter, then you could be brought in front of a congressional hearing or something along those lines. And so what does that do? That keeps people from wanting to innovate and stray from outside the rules. And so his answer to that is what each agency needs is 2 IGs. And it's like, it sounds counterintuitive. Like, why would you want 2 then? You're doubling down. He's like, no, the second one should be an innovation general. And the innovation general's job would be to go to each agency and make sure you're innovating fast enough. Because what we don't have is that tension that you want, which is risk isn't, we need to manage risk, but we also need to be able to kind of push for the innovation side of it. And that having an innovation general can start to change the culture inside an agency where you start to believe like, I could also be brought in front of a congressional hearing if we're not innovating fast enough. But it's that kind of cultural shift that we need to kind of bring to the table. I think as well, Colin, look, I just think there needs to be a shared empathy, right? As to, and a shared vernacular and in a language. The way things are done, maybe, in the Valley or, in startup world where I, spent 25 years as a professional, those are different environmental conditions than when you're collaborating with government. And so being sensitive to that and understanding that, and also recognizing that, the folks there have a tremendous amount of expertise. And, how one kind of brings that shared language together, I think becomes incredibly important. So, look, I think a lot of this is deeply cultural. These worlds have been very separate for so long. But now as we try to tackle these larger problems and need these worlds to come together, we need to think about how do we build those bridges to enable that.
And speaking of building those bridges, so what prevents these public-private partnerships from being successful once they are formed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we have a chapter in the book about, kind of what we talk about as the uncertainties around public-private partnerships. And there are five that we outline. The incentives need to be aligned. The outcome needs to be agreed upon. The process by which you do it, right? Like again, if one partner is about like has defined the process before you engage, and the other one wants to kind of keep innovating and deviating from that, having some understanding of how we can innovate and collaborate around that becomes incredibly important. Relational uncertainty. Again, in government, there's a notion of like deep relationships and trust, and how do you build that? In startups, you're forming, you're new, and so how do you find other ways to leverage that to build trust? And then finally, timing, right? Like the cycle time of which startups work are very different. Now, these are all uncertainties that any public-private partnership will have, but the difference in it, and I think this is why we believe and we talk about in the book, we need another model for it, is that typical public-private partnerships really refer to government and big companies, right? As opposed to, probably many of the founders that are, on this webinar, where they're going to be cash constrained. They're milestone based, capital infusion. And so, if the government, or a partner says, hey, look, we're going to get you an award in 90 days and it slips 6 months, if you're a large company, no harm, no foul, you keep going. You're one of the founders on this webinar, it could be catastrophic, right? Because you've put all your eggs in this basket, you're expecting a contract to come in, and now 6 months go by, and now you've ramped up, you've got resources, but you don't have the revenue and the burn and things of that sort. So, what we try to propose in the book is another way of thinking about how we redefine government venture arrangements as a new way of looking at kind of how ventures can be collaborating with government. And we do it in a way where it's already happening. We try to do this through storytelling and sharing stories of people that have been successful and why they've been successful, so that it doesn't feel like it's theoretical and just ideas, but a collection of folks of examining why people have been successful, and then what we can learn from it, and then most importantly, how do we amplify it and make it the norm?
Yep. And speaking of milestones, and our program also makers supports entrepreneurs working around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So hopefully, this is a positive answer from your end, but is it possible to do good and earn good money?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've got two kids in college right now. I teach at Georgetown, at Stanford, so I'm around a lot of students. But both at a personal level and then at a academic level, when I'm talking to them, I advise them that there's been no better time to be able to do both. And I say that because I think that we've had this time period where it's felt like an artificial period where either you're starting your companies, your ventures for the commercial market, or you go into government. And the nice thing over the last decade, I think, is we now have proof points of companies that have been successful. Targeting the government as their number one customer, and then from there expanding out into other markets. And both on the cyber side, bio side, healthcare, space. Now I think you're going to start to see some of this stuff with AI as well. And so, for me, I think that's where there's a lot of optimism, because, our industry and venture, follows success, right? And, when I was early in investing in cybersecurity, people would tell you, stay away from government, because it's too hard. And now that you've seen success stories out there, you see people saying, look, you should start there, Because if you can prove yourself there, then that gives you credibility to go into the commercial market in a different way, depending on what your products and services may be. And so, yeah, I think there's never been a time where you've seen capital flow into these markets to try to solve these kinds of problems like you are today. And it's not just venture. It's capital from private equity, it's capital from foundations, high net worth individuals, family offices. Look, with the uncertainty even in our commercial markets, I mean, governments are still a stable buyer, right? The issue has been, how do we kind of create this collaboration to be able to kind of get, our earlier stage companies to be able to, fit the cycle time and the needs of government in a meaningful way. And as I think that, there's still a lot of work to do there, but as that's getting better, I think we're starting to see more and more capital flow into this.
Great news, Arun. So in the book, Venture Meet Mission, you emphasize the importance of personalizing entrepreneurship and humanizing government. Can you explain?
Yeah, sure. So in the class I taught Valley Meets Mission, one of the observations, was, and Mike Morrell would say it well. He's like, what I love about your class, Arun, is that like 40% of the students hate government and the other 40% hate entrepreneurial capitalism. And you're trying to land the plane by the end of the course that we need both if we're going to solve big problems. And it speaks a little bit to just the polarization and somewhat of the, simplistic view sometimes we have, right? We just say government, we need government out of my business and get government out. And so like, well, what part of government, what don't you like? Like, what is it about, and then none of that fits in a tweet. But if you have the time to unpack it, you realize that you need to humanize government. Like government's an organization. Government's an organization made up of people. So when one says, 99% of those people have really positive intent. They go, there's a difference between civil servants and politicians. They're going in and that's what I mean by humanizing it, right? It's very different to talk about government as one big opaque institution. It's another thing to break it down to its more molecular level of people and agencies that are trying to serve a purpose, right? That they are trying to solve problems and trying to do the best they can. It doesn't mean they always get it right, but no organization does. On the flip side, personalizing entrepreneurship, I think, there's a group that would also conflate entrepreneurship with like the billionaire class. And so they just, when you talk about entrepreneurs, they just think of them as being socially extractive, they've made too much money and have too much power and things of that sort. And what gets lost in that is that like, entrepreneurship is more than that. One, like 99.99% of entrepreneurs are not that. Two, it's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about things. So personalizing entrepreneurship it's not something that someone else is doing, but each of us actually has the agency to be an entrepreneur. That you don't even have to start a business to do that, right? Like, we say in the book, like even starting a family is an entrepreneurial endeavor. And there's a lot of, parallels one can draw. You test and learn, you're getting product market fit, like you're raising your kids and you're trying to figure this out. And that's an entrepreneurial mindset. And so if we can try to take away, really what we're trying to bring down is the heat on the judgment of both of those sides. Because until you bring down that heat, you can't really get into the more kind of, cognitive ways of saying like, how can we collaborate? If we start to believe that we need both of these institutions to be able to solve big problems.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of solving big problems, why have we overlooked the government's role in major technological and scientific advancements?
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to why. I think part of it is that, look, as government, especially in liberal democracies, and where we've tended to do is, Mariana Mazzucato writes about this, where she says, governments tend to socialize risk, and we privatize reward. So what does that mean? Like the heavy R&D of breakthrough technologies and things of that sort, government takes on. But then the upside of building businesses and commercializing that and things of that sort, we leave to the private sector. And in that transition, we don't have a marketing arm that's telling folks that like, hey, every major part of the iPhone was actually a government DARPA, a project somewhere along the line, right? And so we get enamored with the final product. Having said that, like the truth is that the birth of Silicon Valley, really its roots are in defense research. And in an odd way, I kind of feel like we're at a point in time like where we're coming full circle, where like government helped birth the Valley. And now, we need to bring those connections back to bear, where a lot of that mindset and what we've done to create these businesses. I know the folks at General Catalyst use a word of like radical collaboration. Like, how do you bring this idea of not being disruptive, but radically collaborating to change the way things are done, right? And that's a very entrepreneurial mindset, and that's something that we're looking to that we write about.
Mm-hmm. Love the folks over at General Catalyst. So obviously, you're talking about this full circle moment of having government and startup ecosystem and small businesses work back together. And we found that through our research that attracting and retaining top talent, even for startups, is one of their top 5, at least, challenges. So that being said, how can the government attract and retain top talent from some of these organizations that are building it over neck break speeds?
Yeah, no, to me, it's the most fundamental question, right? Because we can talk all we want about technology and organizations and collaboration, but all of it ends up kind of rolling right down back. It's about people. It's about talent. So you can say, hey, the government needs to do more on AI, but that means you need to have people on the inside that understand AI to know how to collaborate with the innovators on the outside around what AI to bring in and how to use it. And so, what I think, there's different levels here. One is that creating a groundswell of interest, prestige, and demand again around government service for students coming out of school. We use an anecdote. 2 students, one was selected to both CS majors. One was selected to do Kessel Run, which is a software military program, very prestigious. Tells her friend she's going to go into go do that after school, and her friends go, "Why would you go to government when you can do all these other things here in the Valley?" Her other friend was selected to go do Teach for America, and her friends go, "Wow, that's amazing. You're going to serve, you're going to give back, and then you can go do whatever you want." And it's that paradoxical juxtaposition that we were trying to get at, which is, we've lost that sense of like government being a prestigious place to start your career. We need that kind of program that kind of can become an anchor that people can go to and say, like, I was selected to be X. We're trying to do this at Noble Reach now, and creating a Noble Reach Scholars Program. But, I'm a X scholar. I go in for 1 or 2 years. And then when I come out, it's a career enhancer. Like, I can go do things because a not-for-profit that's outside can also collaborate with, leading private sector companies to make it very attractive for them to want to, collaborate with this kind of talent. So I think the way we talk about the words we use, Colin, are important. I think the government sells jobs. Students are buying experiences. The government sells jobs. The students are buying mission. The government sells careers, and the students are buying experiences, right? But if we could start providing mission-driven experiences for students to go into, that's interesting, and we've seen overwhelming interest around that, with some of the work that we've been doing. I think secondly, you've got senior folks. I think there's a growing number of second career folks, people that have had great private sector careers or first careers, and now want to deploy their talents around mission-oriented work, and creating the pathways for them to be able to kind of come in. And they may not want to come directly into government, but ways that they can kind of use their talents around that. It's another thing that we've been exploring. And the other has been, a more systemic and structural relationship whereby, especially with our large tech companies and or leading tech innovators, whereby they may be able to loan tech talent, for 1 or 2 year rotations in the government. So, think of it as a civic sabbatical. Being able to go in for a year or two, you're able to keep your spot where you are, but it's your way of feeling like you've given back, done stuff, but also transfer knowledge, because that's what we need. We need more of that transfer of knowledge going in and out. But I think all of that contributes to kind of re-energizing and replenishing kind of the talent pool inside of government right now.
And yeah, I mean, having that knowledge transfer, the network transfer, understanding how the gears fit together, I think it's all super important. So in the book, you talk a lot about this, but I'm curious to hear, how does your vision for public-private partnerships differ from the traditional model?
Yeah, I think, look, we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, Colin. I think the traditional model really is about more privatizing large industries. And so it's usually large companies working with government, which is a very different model. The second is it's also a very services-based model. A lot of times it's really about staff augmentation for government, right? Like, oh, we can't get this talent, we'll outsource it, let you guys do the work. And I think, again, Mariano Mazzucato's got a book coming out called The Big Con, which is like, look, we need to have that talent inside of government doing the thinking and around these things. So, I think what we're trying to get at here in the book is I think this next wave is really around, building, products and scalable products, which is what venture VCs are looking for, that can collaborate with government to solve big problems and then scale in a more meaningful way, right? And again, I think, we have the capability of doing this. And the government has different tools. You need to use different tools when you're working with startups. So what do I mean by that? Despite popular belief, if you're a successful startup, getting capital isn't the issue, right? The real issue is getting contracts and revenue, right? And so how the government can use, their ability to provide advanced purchase orders to enable startups to mobilize around outcomes. In a weird way, what they're doing then is funding outcomes, not picking winners, right? So if anyone can, and look, we did this with COVID vaccines. We did this with SpaceX and space launchers. So we have the capability of doing this as a country. And where we kind of say, hey, these are the outcomes that we want to see. Anyone that can get there, and here's some intermediate steps, will get X amount of funding to get you to the next level, right? I think that's a really powerful mechanism. I think the government can also play a role to help mitigate risk, right? For your founders out there, it's either about risk or reward, right? And what's a way to mitigate risk? Let's say you had to put up a plant. The government could say, we'll take 10 to 20% first loss on the project. We do this right now overseas with DFC. What does that do? That makes it more attractive for capital to come into the project because they know that there's somebody there that's, at least de-risking it to some extent. And that makes it better for the entrepreneurs like those that are on the webinar to be able to get capital. And it's also a tacit endorsement. So, these are different levers, I think, but these are different levers for government to collaborate than they do with, the traditional public-private partnership models that we have today.
And also, just to double click on that, I feel like I've seen, at least through experience, I'm talking to our founders and the community out there, that the ease of communication, the RFP process has been, the barrier to that communication stream is actually way lower nowadays than it used to be.
Yeah, it's getting better. It can still be a lot better. I think people would tell you, right? But it is getting better. And look, and traditionally an RFP has been like, these are the things we want you to do, right? And what's the cost to go do it? The other way to look at it is this is the outcome we're looking for, and this is the price points we're willing to pay for that outcome. And, give us your proposal. And I think the latter, and, a good friend, Tom Khalil, would say this, takes us down a path where government is funding outcomes, right? We're as opposed to presuming that they know what the solution should be. They're saying this is the outcome we're looking for, and that's what we're looking to fund. I was involved with a company in 1901 that did this on the labor side, where they were, providing managed services for cyber and cloud services to government agencies. But their point was like, look, we will manage those devices for you. There's two models. One, you can either, have, the typical SI would send labor, to those offices and they charge them a certain amount. The other is, hey, look, tell us what devices you want managed. We'll manage them for a specific cost. How we do that, we'll take care of it, right? The latter is a more efficient way of operating, right? Because at the end of the day, and it is how the commercial market operates, which is, you have SLAs, you pay for outcomes. And so it's a bit of that, the more that we can move down that path.
Yep, and it feeds entrepreneurs' brains to think about outcomes in the end, at the end goal.
And it also feeds their brains to be creative with how to get those outcomes, right? Like it allows the market and the talent, and then the capital to form around solutions in a more efficient manner.
Yeah, can't agree more. How did living through existential threats impact the mindset of the youngest generation of workers and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, look, I think this is a big part of the why now story. When I get asked about like, why do you think this now versus 5 years ago and things of that sort. And I think a big part of the story is this next generation. I felt it in the classroom when I was teaching pre-COVID. It felt like, people were heads down, just kind of on this kind of, factory line of where they wanted to go work without knowing about why they wanted to go do that. And, whether it be banking, consulting, and tech or whatever. And then COVID kind of hit this little bit of a, whoa, what do we want to do with our lives kind of moment where everyone slows down, is a little bit contemplative. And then you kind of get hit again with, Ukraine, and the geopolitical, so you have this health scare, then you have a geopolitical threat that's existential. And I think this generation is watching video and seeing things in a way that is real time, and they're seeing people fighting for democracy and fighting, and now you've got the geopolitical issues we have now in the Middle East and elsewhere, and and overarching that, then you've got a third existential threat which is ongoing, which is climate, that everyone more palpably feels each year, impacting you and affecting you. And so I think it has a real effect on this generation's psyche, and it shapes them in a way that makes them want to get involved and be part of the solution, and to be a little bit more mission oriented than I think they probably than at least previous generations were, and to try to help be part of solving these larger problems. And I think that's I think that's the big ingredient right now. And in much of the book we try to write, it's for a broad audience, but it really is also generationally targeted for that group, to say, hey, we need you. You can do this. And the capital, the resources, the infrastructure we can help put in place. But every generation's had its time of service, right? We've had this, whether, obviously we had World War II, but then you had the Peace Corps, you had AmeriCorps. I just think we're at this point in time where this generation's history repeats itself, and is now wants to step up to the moment. So I'm optimistic about it. I know there's a lot of folks that would say they're lazy, they don't want to do anything, they don't work as hard, et cetera. My caveat to that is, as long they don't want to just do the mundane thing at the same vigor, maybe. But if you can show them a mission and purpose, they're all in. And I think they're all in a really meaningful level. And there's so many examples of that you can see. And I'm incredibly optimistic about what this generation can go do.
Love that optimism around the purpose driven because yeah, we're seeing it real time in market with our entrepreneurs, but also yeah, with the people that we work with every day. So do you have any current examples? Because I know that our entrepreneurs out there who are purpose driven are always knocking on venture capitalist doors as well as PE and banks for
Yeah.
extra capital. So what are some current examples of purpose driven entrepreneurs and venture capitalists who have successfully partnered with the government?
Yeah, look, it really depends on, again, what area you're going into, whether you're, a space company, a bio company, a healthcare company, excuse me, um, or what domain. But I think there's a number of them on the healthcare side. You've got someone like Arch Ventures that's been phenomenally successful. Founders Fund, General Catalyst, as we've talked about, and Andreessen Horowitz. You're starting to see a number of really mission focused funds getting raised now as well. And so I think the number of funds out there that are interested in this kind of investment thesis is only increasing, and the capital going into some of those existing funds to do this kind of work is also increasing. So, I think the capital flows play well in the favor of those entrepreneurs. As far as there being a better time to be doing this, I can't think of one. I think now, this is where, again, I think also government experience can be helpful, right? Because I think the kinds of teams that are getting funded are the teams that, feel, they do have a level of customer empathy, right? That have spent time in government and understand the needs and, the cadence and how do you collaborate and what do you do? And more importantly, have the trust to kind of, push through the procurement process and things of that sort. So, we could list out probably 100 funds that are now, coming into this space.
Mhm. Arun, this has all been so good. So what's the first step we need to do to repair trust among government, business, and society?
Yeah, look, I think trust is always, about people, right? And so I don't know if there's a thing, but I think creating more convening spaces and safe spaces where folks from these various backgrounds can kind of come together is important. But I also think creating off ramps and on ramps into these worlds is important. Look, I think academics is poor at this. Look, I started teaching, but I'm an outsider, really. I was on the venture side, but teaching at these institutions. But for the folks that's all they do is teach, and they're at these institutions, there's few that have had external experiences, but many of them, if that's all they know, and I'm not sure that's great either, right? And I think these academic institutions would behoove themselves, and they do that to some extent by having adjunct faculty, but being able to incent and create on and off ramps for folks inside to be able to go into the private sector, then come back in an easy way. Likewise in government, being able to do that. And so, look, I think the more diverse experiences people have, I think we've gone through probably a couple of decades of folks feeling like you got to be a deep expert in something really, really narrow. And look, we need that. But we can't have a society of everyone's that, because you need the glue crew that can kind of connect everything together. And we're short on that right now, right? And I think people that can translate across these different domains become really valuable. I think it's a really valuable skill. And the only way you can really translate across these domains is having spent some time in each domain. And so I think the more that we can start to kind of encourage that, And and look, I think the long game is really need to be, again with our students, having them embrace it and not feel like they need to be on a path, right? And encourage kind of the nonlinear kind of career path, and embrace it. Nate Fick, who we profile in the book, says, people ask me, how do I want to be like you, and how do I get to be where you are? And he's like, look, my career makes sense looking backwards, but it never made sense looking forwards. And it's a paraphrases a Steve Jobs quote. And look, I think there's a lot of depth to that, because I think that the most interesting people that we profile, that's kind of how they lived their careers. They didn't know what door number 1, 2, or 3 was going to lead to, but they picked a door and went through it. And when they look back on it, they can create a canvas of like, this was my career arc, but that wasn't the intent when they were going through it. I think that would be the other piece I think we could do.
I love that. And yeah, I got sound advice. It's not knowing what you want to do, it's knowing what you don't want to do as quickly as possible. All right, well, we're almost at our time for Q&A. So for those of you that are on, drop those questions for us in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Arun, just out of mere curiosity from my personal standpoint, pitching to VCs and pitching to government, what are the similarities and what are the differences?
Yeah, wow. Again, the only caveat I have with the question of like pitching to government is that it depends who you're pitching to in government, right? You almost have to be more specific. Is it the end user? Is it the procurement person? Is it the person writing the check? All three could be very different people, and those pitches can be very different. So even just that is a very different pitch. Whereas pitching to a VC. So, but having said that, I think, look, pitching to government, you want to show how you can solve their problem. Very simple, right? Why you can solve their problem better than anything else that's out there, and that it's easy, and that we have a chapter called build the easy button, but that your solution kind of creates a time to value, that they don't have to wait 3 years through some kind of implementation to see value for it, but by bringing you in, you can expedite their way of seeing value quicker, faster. In the book, we highlighted an example from Trey Stevens talking about this with Palantir when he was inside, and how the time to value equation really is what differentiated them early on. With a VC, I think you're trying to show that there's a big market, right? So it's not only that you can solve the problem, but that you're trying to show that like a lot of people have the same problem. Because it's not as interesting to the VC that like, hey, that's great, you can solve this problem for one person, but tell me that there's 10,000 people that want this. So market size, I think, becomes a more important piece. In both cases, why you're better than the competitors are obviously important. And in both cases, I think where they are also similar is focus on team, like why you guys, right? If I'm, this is where trust comes in. Why can you guys do this and someone else can't? And in any early stage investor, that was the number one thing I looked for, right? It was team. And second was market. And then everything else was a distant third, right? Like if I could find a great team and a great market, that was, so much more of like all right, now we'll figure it out, on the early stage side.
Yeah, because they say the only certainty is that products will change, but the founder and the founding team, hopefully the passion will stay.
Right.
All right, one last question, and then we're going to roll into live Q&A. But what industries and sectors are you most excited about in 2024 and beyond?
Look, I think, as I look out, out there, and I'm by no means am I a prognosticator on sectors and things of that sort. And I'm probably, as a VC, we're wrong more than we are right. It's just the nature of our business. But look, I think I am also probably like many a big believer that AI is a very revolutionary kind of platform and a rewrite. That doesn't mean it's just you need to be an AI company, but how you incorporate that in defining your business, I think it's going to create transformational opportunities. I think healthcare and health tech and what's going on there is showing great opportunities as well. What we're seeing, in what I would call kind of the more integrated autonomous software hardware kind of systems design, which kind of plays into defense tech and autonomous. We're at a point in time where we can do things at price points that we could never have thought of before. And that really changes the way we think about national security and the way we can innovate in a much more meaningful way. And I think the dollars that are going into that and some of the work that's being done at the DoD now to facilitate that, I think is very exciting, actually, with the projects that they've got going on there. And then obviously climate. I think the work that's being done and being funded, through the LPO program at the Department of Energy, the equity funds that are going into climate solutions and all across the value chain, I think are extremely exciting. In the final area, I'd say bio. I actually think bio after along with AI, because I think there's a lot of benefit that bio gets from leveraging AI platforms. Has tremendous potential, right? Or already has. I mean, you look at companies like Ginkgo Bioworks and National Resilience and what they're doing, to create real and there's a real bio revolution ahead of us. Again, these are all big spaces that require, and what you do in bio really can affect a larger area of even like agricultural and food. I think that becomes really exciting. But these areas are, again, all areas where you can see entrepreneurs and in government collaboration in some way, shape, or form to help really scale for meaningful societal benefit.
Totally. We got a question here from an attendee. It's a two-part question, so I may split it up. But so you mentioned government outsourcing some of their innovation risks through funding ops challenges like DARPA, ARPA. Do you think that the government funding innovation is insufficient, or should they find the right places to advertise, or like are there signals in the demand that aren't being built, the bridges aren't being connected there?
Yeah. Look, I think there's a role for government in this, and the answer is probably a little bit of both. In that over the horizon tech investment, VCs probably won't make that, right? Because that's 5-10 years out, and it's just beyond the life cycle of which they can kind of bet on. And that's an important role where government kind of plays in, which is like, how do you stay ahead of this, a true science, and making sure that we're pushing the envelope on real science here. And I think that's incredibly important. But what I want to just caveat is people tend to reduce the problem down to amount of capital. And to me, it's less of a capital problem, because there's plenty of capital out there, right? It's about trying to catalyze the ecosystem in a more meaningful way, right? And we're trying to do some of that work through some work we're doing with DARPA and NSF, whereby they do the science piece and funding that, but then they're collaborating with us, where we're managing a program called Emerge that connects them to entrepreneurs, right? Because to now take that to the next level, those aren't the same scientists. To take it out and replicate it and show that you can do this not just once, but do it 1,000 times is a different skill set. And then how do you raise money around that? How do you build a business plan around that? And so I think creating more of those kinds of connections are incredibly important. I think we've had a multi-decade run where we do great government research, and then many times we just think it's all about the technology, and we try to take that technology to the agency. And what's lost in that is what seems obvious insight, which is really it's about the people. Unless you can take the people with it and put the right people around it, attract better people, the technology is not worth that much. And so if we could start to prioritize people over technology as we think about research, I think that becomes a really different and a differentiating mindset.
Mm, super helpful. And in the early stage, you were talking about bio, which can be many, many, many years to market a revenue. But what advice would you give to entrepreneurs in the infancy stages is when struggling with cash flow, just to keep the lights on? Any resources that you'd guide them to besides just opening up your personal savings account?
Yeah. No, look, I think those are real, the realities of things. Look, I think the government's starting to do a better job of creating programs like the SIBR program where, you can go in and try to get grants and to kind of help you keep the lights on. Where I think those kinds of programs fall short is many times I think by entrepreneurs are viewed as a real funding source, as opposed to kind of a bridge to kind of figure it out, because it's not sustainable, right? And ultimately, I think that's the one thing that I think venture funding and or private sector funding kind of provides is that it forces a discipline, that it's not just a grant, but to get the next tranche of funding, you need to hit something or prove something to get to the next level, right? And so I think, look, that's the balance of it. But I do think there's more programs now being developed, inside of, again, energy, DoD and the national security side, even commerce, where capital is available. But I just caution folks of thinking of that as being an alternative,
Mm,
but more of hopefully just a reprieve to kind of, to bridge for a short period of time.
yeah. And we have a couple questions here on just VC in general. So feel free to give a broad strokes answer, or you can get as specific as how one gets a hold of someone like you. But yeah, like if you're an early stage company with a solution out there in market or really close to market, what are some do's and don'ts in terms of like outreaching just anybody with that fuel for the next level, next milestone?
Yeah. Look, I think, when I say this in my class, I teach at Georgetown, network, right? This is all about trust. The currency in our business, or in any entrepreneurial business, is really trust. So when the question is, how do you get to somebody, is think about who in your network may know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that can get you to somebody. Because unfortunately, that's the way this works. And it's not because of anything else. Then so many things are coming at us, right? Some of VC, if I see, if I'm looking at 100, if 100 cold business plans are coming over the transom, how do you prioritize which ones to go after? And if, five of them are trusted, CIOs or CTOs or, execs that say like, hey, I know this team, you should really go meet with them. Those end up being always your top five. And that's, one needs to just understand it's nothing nefarious around it, but it is, becomes a selection, heuristic, to help you prioritize, which ones to go after and or where to spend your time. And so, for those that are out there trying to get to folks that are at venture shops, look, I'd look at, who are the CEOs in their portfolio companies, who are executives in their portfolio companies. Do I know anyone there? Can I get to somebody there to help them, get me an intro? What are the law firms that they use? And maybe those lawyers would know how to connect me. Who are other firms that they've invested in the past? Who are other folks in that ecosystem? So that would, I wish it was a silver bullet answer. But I think that's exactly what I try to get to my students, is you just need to really just be resourceful and creative with, how you get to them.
And we've heard over the years from several VCs who are, investing in minority women entrepreneurs. So it's like your network is your net worth. So go meet as many people as possible. You never know who's going to actually unlock a door for you at one
Yeah.
point. So be nice to everybody.
Yep. Absolutely right. I say the same thing.
And then, so I know I want to wrap with the key takeaway, but one last question on that front. So we've had a lot of our environmentally social or socially impact driven entrepreneurs struggle with in the pitch, focusing on either the mission and the purpose or the financial returns for folks like you. Any balance there that you found to be helpful, or any advice there?
Yeah. Look, I'm a big believer that for this to work, it needs to not be an either or.
Mm.
And so what do I mean by that? In some of the best companies, when we bring them in and, that I have speak to my students, they talk about like, look, we were going to go just solve a mission-oriented problem, right? We were building a business model around how that could then scale. And we even talk about in the book an example of Commonwealth Fusion, which is now one of the leading, SMR nuclear companies, really addressing hopefully some of our climate issues. They started off as an academic research project, and then they lost funding, and so they said, hey, let's try to become a not-for-profit. And then they realized, like, to scale to the level that they needed to get to, they could only do that through equity. And so that was what they did, right? And they said, look, we're still focused on this mission, but we're going to show, like, if we can solve this mission, this is what it can mean from a financial return perspective, right? And so building your business model around the mission, I think, is what the important piece is, and not having them be viewed as separate. It needs to be an integrated part of the business. And the mission needs to be an integrated part of the business, because I think otherwise you end up in this artificial choice of like, here's our business, but we want to do this mission thing on the side. And so, like, how do we take some of the profits from our business and do mission? And that's where the trade-off stuff comes. And I don't think that's sustainable, right?
Well, what a way to tie in the key takeaway of the book, Venture Meets Mission. So if somebody was going to dial into the last 60 seconds of this book, this conversation in the book, what would you have them take away?
Look, I think the takeaway is that I've never been more optimistic around, look, the two superpowers of this country are our entrepreneurial ecosystem and our, higher ed system, and being able to create talent. And the evidence of that is that everyone around the world comes here to do both. Orders of magnitude better than anywhere else in the world. And those superpowers, I think, are what we need, in great power competition against our adversaries to continue to be globally competitive. But what we need to do is now build the infrastructure to connect those ecosystems in a meaningful way around larger government ambitions, so that government can help scale this to a more meaningful level. I think this is a generational opportunity. For this generation, not only to create wealth and create interesting businesses, but to solve large societal problems. And that in Venture Meets Mission, what we're trying to identify is that these don't need to be, a binary choice that people make. Do I do venture or do I do mission? But the time is now, and that the capital can be mobilized around people, purpose, and profit to do both at the same time.
Arun, what a way to end our conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Venture Meets Mission, hot off the press. Check out that link in the chat. Arun, thank you so much. And I can't wait to see what your future work has to unfold for all of us.
Colin, thank you very much for having us. And thank you all for taking the time to listen in.
Amazing. Thanks again. And for those of you still on, we look forward to welcoming you back to all of our great programs. We'd love to see your feedback. And also, again, check out that link to Arun's hot off the press book. For those of you still on, have a great one. And we look forward to welcoming you back online soon. Thanks again, Arun.
Thank you. Take care.